Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
I don't know why. There's no real yeah. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Alright, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is Steve Baxey.
Hello!
Steve, this is Geeky Gentleman History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions that geeky gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by Bai's educational system, except not at all. And this is character discussion. So Steve, which character are we discussing today?
Today, we're discussing Sherlock Holmes.
I was really wondering whether or not you'd remember, because it's been a minute.
It took me a second. It really took me a second there.
Awesome. Yeah, so Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective, except for Batman.
Yes. Everyone except for Batman.
Yep. So Sherlock Holmes is one of those interesting characters, and I've talked about this before, where I actually think, like, Sherlock Holmes is one of those characters who, thank God, the original writer died.
True.
Because I've read Arthur Conan Doyle stuff, like a few of Arthur Conan Doyle's stories with Sherlock Holmes, and they're not, like, particularly good, and I think the reason why is because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was pretty freaking gullible in real life.
Yeah.
Famously, like, he and Houdini were friends, and, like, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle got into the whole mediums and all that stuff, and he was under the impression that was what Houdini was doing, was he was using, like, spiritual power to break out of locks and stuff like that. And Houdini had to sit him down and tell him no, and, like, it was part of what had Houdini go off on his whole, like, disproving mediums thing. And so it's really weird that you have a guy who is that gullible and that willing to believe in, like, the spiritual realm and all that stuff be the person who creates this character that's all about, like, systematic logic and reason and scientific method and all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and part of part of the best things about Sherlock Holmes, I think, is that he's public domain now. So literally anyone can do anything, and like you said, thank God Arthur Conan Doyle died, because those stories can be tedious as fuck. Like, even the short ones can be tedious as fuck. But part of what I like about having so many versions of the character, and some that play into more of that, like, mediums mysticism stuff, and some that are, like, a lot more grounded, depending on what you're going for, is that occasionally you get a version that's, like, really true to Arthur Conan Doyle and kind of makes fun of it. My favorite example is Batman Brave and the Bold, when Batman goes back in time and meets Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock deduces that Bruce's father was a doctor, and he's right. But the way in which he deduces it is some stupid patriarchal bullshit you would have gotten from the 1800s. It doesn't actually make any sense. He's like, broad shoulders and strong chin indicates lineage, noble lineage, like a doctor. Like, boy, that's a stretch, but okay.
Yeah, wow. This is when they're measuring the circumference of the head to determine intelligence.
Exactly.
And looking at the skull. Like, every time I hear that crap, I just remember Leonardo DiCaprio's whole thing from Django, where he's like, these 3 notches in the skull indicate submission. That's always where my head goes. But yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle was kind of a kooky guy, but Sherlock Holmes is a really interesting character. I'm not special. I'm like most people, and I really, really like the BBC series Sherlock.
I love it.
it's a really cool series until Moffat went crazy.
As always.
Clearly lost all ideas. It was just throwing stuff on the wall and see what stuck. So that's why I quit watching after the third season. But man, those first 2 seasons of Sherlock are really good.
That first episode of Sherlock, I think, is the best Sherlock Holmes story there is.
Study in Pink or whatever it was called.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's the episode that has the best editing too, where it's just doing all the cool visual stuff. Yeah, that's a really good one. I also quite like the Robert Downey Jr. films. I'm really shocked they've never gotten around to making a third one because the first one was just kind of okay. The second one was legit good.
I agree.
They've just never gotten around to a third, and I don't know why.
Well, they keep saying that they're going to. I feel like all of the back-to-back Marvel movies are making it tough to do it in any coherent way. But yeah, I mean, I like those movies more than most people. I understand the critique of they're basically superhero movies with Sherlock Holmes, but they're so much fun.
I mean, I don't really have a problem with that. Though.
Yeah.
Like, why is that an issue?
Well, and see, part of what's interesting about those movies is that they borrow that tone and structure from superhero movies, but if you really pay attention, they are really close to the books. Like absurdly close. The description for Watson's wife, the way Sherlock takes his drugs, the way Watson and Sherlock's apartment looks, the way Sherlock dresses, like they are really close to that stuff. And it wouldn't be details that you could just Wikipedia. You have to be able to read them. And no one ever talks about it with those movies. Like, they are surprisingly accurate.
That's interesting, because I didn't know that, because, again, I'm not a huge fan of Doyle's original work. I like stuff that's... I like a lot of the things that Sherlock Holmes has inspired, that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle inspired more than I like his original stuff. And this kind of speaks to the truth of creating a character that outlives the author, and the author is dead, right?
Yeah.
This is why that... This is part of why that phrase exists, and then like it gets harder to talk about it when the author does something horrible. But it's interesting to see the kinds of things that Sherlock Holmes has spun out and created. One thing I really like about the Robert Downey Jr. movies is it is a great example of just mystery on film, wherein it knows for a fact that people don't pay attention during movies. So if you're actually paying attention to like all the heavy details especially in the first movie, you'll literally figure it out before Sherlock. It's like everything you need is there. They use one trick that you obviously can't take advantage of, which is he gets a clue by the way something smells. But otherwise all of it's there for you, which is great.
This is why I like reading the stories, because I don't like mysteries, not usually at least. I think they're always good exceptions, and I'm sure most of the examples I'll come up with are going to be the exception. But I really like mysteries that you can solve them before the main character does, because I think that's a fun challenge. I don't know if you remember these from like back when we were kids. There used to be like these short stories called Encyclopedia Brown. My teacher in elementary school used to, like, when the bell was about to ring before we were about to head out and get the bus home, she would like read one of those like two paragraph stories, and then they would end with, can you figure out what actually happened? And then we'd like spend 5 minutes guessing, and then they would read the answer, and you could have figured it out. And ever since then, I've always really liked Sherlock Holmes stories, because there always comes a really clear point where you should be able to figure this out. You should know. And then Sherlock explains it, and if you read his explanation, all of that stuff was said earlier, and I really like that. Problem, of course, is the way Conan Doyle writes, and so like it gets really repetitive and he pats himself on the back way too much. It's really irritating. So like having those sort of like almost more classical locked room mysteries that Sherlock would do aren't things we see translated to the adaptations very often. The Downey movies are a cool exception to that, and I like that because so many people hate them. But Sherlock is not. I love Sherlock as a show, but those mysteries are contrived as all fuck. Like, there's no way. There's literally no way.
I mean, you're right, but at the same time, it's really cool. Like, I love I love the origin for Moriarty in that, where he's like
Yeah.
he's a criminal consultant and he just puts Sherlock through the ringer in his first episode and has him do all this stuff. And then it turns out he'd introduced himself to Sherlock, and they go with all the gay subtext, which is great. I really, really enjoyed that. Yeah. Something else that I quite like that is, it's Asian anime Sherlock Holmes. Let's just be honest about it. Case closed, the Secret Life of Jimmy Kudo, or Detective Conan, whatever you call it. Yeah.
Case Closed is so much fun.
It is. It's a really fun show. It's got a stupid-ass opening intro song, but it's a really fun show.
I don't even know if they've kept up dubbing it, but because it's gone on for fucking ever, but I really, really liked that show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a fun one. I remember watching it on Adult Swim, and that had, they straight up tip their hat and say, yeah, my favorite fictional character is Sherlock Holmes, and it just totally fits. It's a great thing. A lot of the mysteries that Jimmy deals with, it's got it's a series where a teenager is turned into a little boy, and that's not exactly the most logical kind of crime.
No, but after you give it that.
Yeah, after you give it that, they really do pull off a lot of really nice and clever mysteries. Just in that first episode, Jimmy deduces the way that a murder was carried out on a roller coaster. He's like, she's a gymnast, and then I felt a drop of water from her tears on my forehead on the roller coaster. I don't know, it's neat.
So one thing I want to talk about real quick with Sherlock as a type of story is the whole deductive reasoning thing that he does, because Sherlockian logic, or Holmesian logic, I don't know what the proper name for that is. It's probably Holmesian. Holmesian sounds more proper. But that kind of logic has been studied a lot ever since it came about. And everything you ever watch has him say he's doing deductive logic. And I'm gonna tell you right now, as a person that is taking multiple classes on basic critical thinking, deductive logic, advanced logic, and philosophy of language, he is not doing deductive logic. If you think he's doing deductive logic, you're an idiot. He's doing adductive inductive logic, which basically means there are patterns, and patterns imply that they're going to keep happening, and the simplest explanation for that to keep happening is your answer. Deductive logic says take A and B and yield C. He never does that. He just says if A, then A. Which is also why most of his deductions in the original book are kind of bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Sherlock Holmes is that weird thing where I feel like so many people, so many annoyingly pompous people, say oh yeah, I relate to Sherlock Holmes, that kind of quiet genius who's an asshole and no one appreciates him. No, you don't. If you read those books, you know he doesn't actually know anything.
Fair. Let's use that to transition. How do you feel about the way in which he's been portrayed, particularly in things like Sherlock and the Robert Downey Jr. movies, where he's just this completely asocial, brain that just has to deal with people and their emotions from time to time. And he's just completely oblivious to it most of the time. And he just does a lot of crazy bullshit. It's interesting because both Sherlock and the Downey Jr. movie do a very similar thing, wherein he just starts firing a gun at a wall.
Yeah,
it's for different reasons, but it's goes back to the same core reason of I'm bored and I'm trying to find things to do to occupy my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I always really liked that idea of. Because Sherlock says in part of what I like about in the books is that Sherlock Holmes would talk about I think in the Sign of Four about he brags about not knowing astronomy and stuff like that, and Sherlock does a cool more modern spin on it where he calls his brain his hard drive, and he says that the more he retains information that wouldn't be immediately useful, the longer it would take him to get to the information that would be. So knowing about the number of moons on a particular planet makes it so knowing certain types of chemicals and stuff like that in basic chemistry takes longer for him. And so that kind of academic specialization, I guess you could call it, makes him exceptionally antisocial. And it makes it so even if he deals with the same person a lot, learning and retaining social skills is not his strong suit. And I really like that. It's not even sort of like the sort of we've almost like created this weird idea that kind of aloof personality is cool, and that's kind of irritating. You see that a lot with like Rick and Morty fanboys that go overboard. They're like, no, the point of that show is that Rick is a jerk. If you don't get that, I don't care how well you're reading the science of that show. And so like we've even done with Sherlock Holmes, where like the same sort of personality type that latched on to Rick being an asshole thinks Sherlock Holmes is awesome because he's an asshole. But that's not it. What it is
House.
Yeah, like House. Like what it is that this guy is both introverted and never tries to better himself, and he just doesn't understand. It's not autism, but like it's a very similar socially controlled way of becoming like that. And I always really liked that. I always liked how simple it was. Where like he's not a jerk, he's just oblivious and he doesn't care.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's like a lot of that in earlier things of Sherlock, but you know, over the years we've kind of become more aware of that personality type, and now it's being more exaggerated.
Yeah.
Because like House kind of, you know, House is Holmes, right? It's been a pretty obvious parallel, and House is a lot like that too, but not to the same degree that like Robert Downey Jr. or Benedict Cumberbatch play it in their separate things. And it's just like it's become more expressed and more prevalent over the years as I feel like we've become more aware of that type of personality.
Well, and I don't even think that Downey's version of Sherlock is that much of an asshole in the same way someone like House or Benedict Cumberbatch is, because there's that great scene in the first one where Watson's fiance is like pressing Sherlock to do a read on her, and so he does, and then she gets really mad, and he's just kind of like wallowing there, and he's kind of sad about it. I feel like Downey almost plays it more as he's oblivious, but he's trying to have fun with it. He's not like Benedict Cumberbatch's, where like that version resists changing with almost a passion. I feel like Downey's is just almost more carefree about it, and I really like that.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like, I think Downey's is obviously older, and like he's kind of aware that he's an asshole.
Yeah,
and he's trying to change.
Or at least people think that people think of him as an asshole. People take him as an asshole. I wouldn't go so far as to call him an asshole. I just think that he doesn't gel with the people he's around. That's
fair. He is not good at socializing. He is very aware of that, and so like he comes off as an asshole. Let's put it that way. Okay, what else can we talk about with Sherlock Holmes? Do you have...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we already talked about your favorite Sherlock Holmes story. Do you have another one besides the Sherlock episode?
So things that don't count, things that aren't the actual short stories and novels. The other one would be the Ian McKellen movie that came out a couple of years ago now, Mr. Holmes, where it's set, I want to say like right before World War I. It's almost like a sequel to the end of the original book, where in the original short stories he retires and lives upstate and like raises bees. And that movie is him raising bees, and he's old, and he's starting to his memory and stuff starting to go, and he's like flashing back and forth to his last case, and it's entirely about like, what is a character like Sherlock Holmes, whose entire personality is dictated on the ability to retain information, do when he naturally can't retain information anymore. Where like he spent all of these years crafting his hard drive, and at some point it's just going to die. There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm. I've not heard of that. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh, it's beautiful. I think it's Ian McKellen's best performance ever. It's so good. And he is... In that movie, I want to say he plays my favorite live-action Sherlock Holmes. Because he plays it two ways. He plays it as the senile old man who's remembering things in broken-up fragments, and he's playing it as an older version, but still in his prime. So you get to see him as kind of like the arrogant, well-dressed, well-mannered, smart Sherlock, and then like 10 years down the line, you see him as the broken, senile old man, and it's beautiful.
Cool. I really like a lot of the early episodes of Sherlock. That first season's really good. As far as like a more classical Sherlock, I really like the second Robert Downey Jr. movie.
I do too.
Game of Shadows is really good. Maybe it's just because I like that the villain's a capitalist. I don't know. We're establishing a theme between this and the Zorro review I just did with Rasco. We're establishing a theme on like my feelings towards villainy. But I really like the way that portrays it. And it's just naturally interesting, the idea of Moriarty, to give him that character, that like adversary that's just as smart but on the opposite side of the moral spectrum. That's great.
Well, and in particular, in that movie, because that was around the same time as everything started to do the whole, what's it called? Reichenbach fall. That whole, the final problem thing that even the Sherlock TV show does, where like Sherlock and Moriarty struggle and they fall off a cliff and Sherlock fakes his death. Around that movie and around the end of Sherlock season 2, it seemed like almost everyone was doing that, and it was getting kind of obnoxious and boring. And that movie, when they were like just sort of going back and forth with each other, explaining how they got here, and like it does that really overt chess metaphor thing, which is fine. I think it's cool. But then at some point, Sherlock realizes that Moriarty kind of already figured all of this out, and then he just like breaks the pattern and tries to fight him, and I love that. I like that at the very end in that movie, it's not about deduction anymore, because Sherlock kind of lost, so he just kind of like, hey, fuck it, I'm gonna beat the crap out of you. It's great.
Yeah, and I like that like they go to, okay, so here's my plan for how I'm gonna take him out, and then we get like it interrupted. Moriarty like cuts in, and so he's already thinking on the same level of, oh, you want to fight now? I've got you beat there too. And so Moriarty breaks it down on how to fight back. And then, like, Sherlock does the thing that Moriarty is not expecting, though, and he's like, well, the thing that's most illogical is to accept losing and make us both lose. And so he kills himself. And that's just really great. I really like that. It's really cool. Well,
what
else?
Another thing I just want to talk about with Sherlock Holmes, just because I really enjoy reading those types of stories, is in the old TV show, the old British TV show, I think that one was called Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I forget the guy who plays him in that. It's Jeremy something. In that old show, it was very much like a almost Twilight Zone kind of atmosphere, except it was just mysteries. And a lot of those almost word for word adapted the old short stories. And there's a lot of moments where either Sherlock doesn't solve the crime and we never know, he loses, or the mystery's solved, but it's not because he got it right. And I kind of miss doing stuff like that and not making it overly grandiose. Like if House misdiagnoses a person, it's a big character arc kind of moment. When Sherlock gets something wrong in Sherlock, he has like he has like a mental breakdown. In the old stories and in that old TV show, he gets something wrong, and it's just like, oh, okay, 9 times out of 10. I kind of miss that. I kind of miss that sort of like his arrogant bubble doesn't burst. I don't think of Sherlock as arrogant. I think of him more so just as what's because I think arrogant is more of like a fault, and I think having an ego and being arrogant are two separate things. So I think he has more of an ego where like he takes pride in his abilities, but he's not arrogant to a fault.
Yeah, I'd agree. I like that, and that's a good way to portray him. And when Sherlock gets something wrong, well, that wasn't when they started doing stuff in like the later seasons, if I'm remembering correctly, and that was like kind of lost me.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with Sherlock? We need to fill like 2-3 more minutes.
So do you remember that really old, not really old, it's like an 80s, 90s cartoon where Sherlock Holmes goes to the future?
No.
God, it was Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century or something like that. I'm not bringing that up to review that show, but I wanted to mention it because of, since this is History Month, and since we were talking about both Sherlock Holmes and the Downey movies, how do you feel about characters like Sherlock Holmes being ripped out of their original time zone?
You know, it's interesting because you wouldn't think it would necessarily work as well as it did, but I like the Downey movies. Sherlock's just, miles better.
Yeah.
There's really no way around it. Like, it gets worse, but just from the gate, it was miles better.
Yeah.
And, it worked putting Sherlock in the modern day. I haven't watched Elementary, but
I don't like that show.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I really didn't like that show. But see, from what I understand, people that enjoyed Sherlock seem to really dislike Elementary, and people who enjoy Elementary really seem to dislike Sherlock. So
that's funny.
I guess maybe that's where that is. If anyone was going to break that pattern, it'd probably be you, though.
Maybe. I don't know. You're just buttering me up. No, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't have a problem with a character, continuing on into the modern day. It's so weird. I honestly find it stranger that it doesn't happen more often. Again, I was just talking with Rasco about Zorro. I don't know why Zorro has not been made into a legacy character. I honestly cannot tell you.
Yeah, and I mean, in particular, when nothing about that character necessitates a particular timeline, because we both read a lot of comics, I imagine the whole kind of sliding timeline concept isn't really hard for us to digest. At the same time, though, I could see an argument for certain people who maybe watch this video and say something along the lines of Sherlock's style of deduction or the kind of resources available to him color the kinds of mysteries you can tell, and for some reason they might just think that's better in the 1800s as opposed to 21st century. I think Sherlock kind of proves that doesn't have to be the case, though.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's kind of fun that Sherlock, the TV show, and the Downey movies came out at around the same time. So we got that period piece and we got that modern adaptation. Just for contrast's sake. I like him in the 1800s just from a purely aesthetic thing where I think it's just cool that he's running around with a cane and a top hat. But honestly, hipster culture, he could do that now.
Yeah. I will say this. I think that he fits really well in the 1800s because his attitude fits with the idea of the romantic obsession with the scientific method, that romantic idea that the scientific method will solve all problems, and if we can just apply it to everything, we can find a way to solve every issue.
Yeah.
And so that kind of fits really well in that period. We're talking about mid to late 1800s as we get, the death of Nietzsche and the classical way of thinking, and science starts making all these major strides and kind of reimagines the way that people think about the world. I think that's really interesting. So I feel like it might fit character-wise a little bit better in the 1800s, but I don't have a real problem with him being modernized and brought to the present day. Or, I don't know, would you watch a future Sherlock Holmes where it's he was born in decades from now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with giving it a try or anything, really. You're right, though. I think it definitely fits better in that certain context, but there's no reason why it can't be used in other scenarios. Even a futuristic Sherlock Holmes, just not even 100 years or a century in the future, but even 10 years. I don't know, Sherlock Holmes set in Blade Runner 2039, 2049, something like that.
We got a lot of catching up to do to catch up with Blade Runner 2049. Just saying.
Really do.
Everyone was making Back to the Future jokes. I'm going to be alive when we're making Blade Runner 2049 jokes, since we still don't have giant naked pink holograms in the middle of the street. Just saying, we got a lot of catching up to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Kind of makes you wonder, though, because in that cartoon I mentioned, Sherlock's cane will also turn into a lightsaber.
Of course.
And I kind of just wonder about certain inventions being really, really advanced and other things not so much. Like, we can have lightsaber, Blade Runner umbrellas, but we can't have flying cars. But yeah, like Sherlock in like almost like 10 seconds ahead in the future, something like that. I'd be down for something like that, where like Sherlock as a character and his deductive logic and the kind of tools he utilizes are more and more rooted in how we do things now. Because I feel like the way policing has evolved, the way the internet's evolved, Sherlock as a show does a lot to kind of like stay up to date with that. But then at the same time, there's a lot of stuff where if you take this personality and you take the path of that technology, try to make it jump just a little bit higher, you can get some really cool dystopian Twilight Zone-y fiction.
Yeah, I'd agree. That'd be neat. Okay, well, shit, now I gotta think of a character to talk about. Looking around, trying to see if anything jumps to mind for me. What's a good character that we can discuss later on? I already did Greek mythology, so I want to avoid that. I don't know enough about any of the Arthurian stuff. Let's talk about Jonah Hex.
That could be fun. I know
Yeah.
a little bit about Jonah Hex, but not a ton, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be cool. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for watching, though. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the Exile.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.